Welcome to the webinar, Leveraging the Science of Optimism for Dental Practice Success. The lecture will be presented by Dr. Martin R. Mendelson, FIAD, FE, CPC, and we're going to begin shortly. And now it is my distinct honor to welcome Dr. Martin Mendelson to our platform this evening. He is the founder of Metamorphosis Coaching and former resident faculty at Spear Education. He has over 20 years of experience and certifications in executive, team coaching, facilitation, emotional intelligence, and happiness studies. Martin has empowered leaders and teams across North America to excel and thrive. As a captivating speaker, coach, and masterful facilitator, he unleashes the power of his TEAM approach, guiding clients to shed the burdens of traditional leadership and embrace cohesion for unparalleled growth and fulfillment. His first book, published by New York City-based Morgan James, will be out later this year, and he is a newly appointed executive contributor for Brains magazine. And now it is my pleasure to say, take it away, Dr. Mendelson.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's an absolute pleasure. I want to thank NDX for having me here to spend a little time with everybody this evening. And it's really a distinct honor and a full circle moment, which I will share with you a little bit later. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, really what we're doing is I'm going to be, I believe, getting into your brain a little bit. Because the truth of the matter is that we are dentists who are humans. And so dentistry is what we do. Dentistry is not who we are. My theme for 2025 is this. When we are at the chair and our patients are reclined and their mouths are open, what we do, yes, is 1000% unique. But everything that comes before they're sitting in the chair and after they get up is not. So how can we embrace literature, protocols, best practices from other industries, professions, and the literature, the behavioral literature, to bring us down a different path? And so as we go on this journey this evening, I'd like to start with a quote. It's a quote that's become the very cornerstone of my work. And it's a quote that's been attributed to a man by the name of Viktor Frankl. Dr. Viktor Frankl was a neurologist, psychiatrist, and Holocaust survivor that survived the horrors of Auschwitz for years, to come out the other side, to become an internationally known thought leader, to get people to understand that meaning and purpose drives happiness in life. And the quote that has been attributed to Viktor Frankl, as stated by Stephen Covey, is this: between stimulus and response, there's a space. In this space lies our freedom to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So Dr. Frankl would tell you that everything that happens in our lives is neutral. We enter a space of decision. And how we exit that space, well, that's up to us. And we're going to talk all about the science of optimism, focus, and how you can navigate through a different reality tomorrow. The other quote I want to share with you as we navigate together this evening is from Dr. Frankl directly, and it is this: everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Now, this was my way in 2003. I had been in dentistry since I was 16 years of age. I started in a dental practice as an assistant, wearing white pants even after Labor Day. And so dentistry was all I ever knew, and this was my reality. That's my nephew, Stephen, who today is in his mid-30s teaching high school math in Florida. And 10 years into my clinical career, things started to change. And I felt like my life was actually slipping away right before my eyes. And within 6 months of that picture being taken, I was actually out of the practice of dentistry for good. I was in my mid-30s. Go try to find a job when you're too young for some stuff, too old for others, too inexperienced for this, and too experienced for that. I felt like everything was slipping through my fingers, and in my live lectures and in my book, I described the morning when I attempted to open up a Sweet 'n Low packet and the pain just shot right through my arm. And I had an epiphany, a moment, shall we say, where a single thought changed the entire trajectory of my life. And it went something like this: I don't know what's going to happen from this day forward, but you know what? I am going to be okay because I make a choice. I got news for you. I never imagined this as where my life would end up being. But I'll tell you what, it wasn't so easy. Today, people see me as this guy, the guy on stages. But from that day when I was attempting to open up a sweet and low packet, you ready for this? I was out of work for 17 months. Try finding a job in 2003 when there is no Google or email like there is today, when you're too young for some and too old for others. And so that ended up starting on a different road. And ironically enough, I told you I'd tell you a full circle moment. Guess where I worked after that 17 months? I actually worked for the NDX lab in Clearwater. So what have I done since then? Well, I was the guy at the lab. I then worked for Vita in North America, overseeing education across North America. As Jessica shared with you, I had a very proud, very, very fun tenure at Spear Education as a member of the resident faculty and an executive vice president. And as Jessica shared with you, yeah, I'm a bit of a unicorn because I have a whole bunch of certifications to help dentists and their teams, as I like to say, get out of their own way. So as we get past this, why is Martin Mendelsohn even have the chops to talk to you about this tonight? I'd like you to take a look at my logo on the right side of the screen. It's an acorn that turns into a tree. It's a metamorphosis. And it encapsulates metaphorically everything I believe about myself and everything I believe about you. Because the tree, the beautiful tree, looks nothing like the brown acorn that it came before, but yet the acorn had everything inside it all along to become that beautiful tree. I believe that about me, and I believe that about you. So I have a promise to make to you tonight. My promise is that this is going to be all killer, no filler, evidence-based on the science of optimism and how to bring yourself to a different place, whatever place that is you're in today. But I have a challenge to you because a lot of this stuff isn't necessarily what we were taught in dental school. In fact, none of it is. And so I invite you to leave your yeah buts at the door as we go on this journey together. And at the end of our time here together, I'm going to give you several gifts, true gifts, where you can gain some additional knowledge through podcasts and some articles I've written and so forth. Now, part of this course was a learning map, a two-sided learning map. This is the back side. Y'all know what to do with a QR code, but there is a front side. That is a fill in the blank. And this is an evidence-based reason as well, because if all you were to do, studies show, is to sit here and listen to me flap my jaw for the next, 50 minutes or so, you'd only remember about 20%. I already actually gave you two answers when we talked about Viktor Frankl. The upper left, everything that happens is neutral. And on the upper right, happiness, I may not have said this, happiness is a comparative emotion. We're going to talk about the research from Lubomirsky a little bit later that determined that concept. And you'll also notice at the center, there's a space for your commitment, your goal, what you're going to either A, take away from this or do moving forward. There's an evidence-based reason for that as well. If you write down a goal based on research out of a university in California, Dominion University, you are upwards of 46% more likely to achieve said goal. If you share that commitment with a friend, colleague, or family member, you're now upwards of 64%. That's 65% of the way there to achieve said goal. And if you then also set a deadline, guess what? You're now upwards of 95% of the way there to achieve said goal. So setting goals are important, sharing goals are important, setting deadlines are even more important. So what I'm going to say to you with a smile on my face is that your mindset drives your happiness and your happiness drives your practice. Frankly, it drives your life because everything happens and it starts to happen between our ears with a thought. Jessica mentioned my team framework. And so I'm sure you've heard the phrase before, there is no I in team, correct? I'm sure you have. But you know what there is in the word team? The word me. And the me's in your organization, your practice, whether it's you and or everybody else that you work with, bears a responsibility for understanding that what's going on between your ears actually matters. I told you that I was going to share with you a lot of evidence and a lot of numbers and research. And according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, you ready for this one? It's estimated that negativity costs businesses of all types, estimated upwards of $3 billion a year. If that wasn't enough, saying with a smile on my face, according to research often quoted by the National Science Foundation, we produce up to 50,000 thoughts per day. 80% of those are negative and 95% of those are repetitive. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Let's say you interact with upwards of 20 patients on a given day, and 2 of them gave you a hard time. When you're driving home, who are you thinking about? Oh, I know. It's the 2. But why are we not thinking about the 18? They are just as valuable and just as important, but we end up focusing on the negative, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And unfortunately, we as dental professionals, we're not happy people, statistically. Now, in the middle of the pandemic, I had the absolute blessing of good fortune to meet this man who's become one of my dearest friends. His name is Dr. Kyle Stanley, and he introduced me to a lot of research around how much we struggle within dentistry. And as you see, this is 10 years old and it's only gotten worse. And so to summarize this for you in pretty simplistic numbers, we as dentists are 2 times more likely to suffer from depression, anxiety disorder, panic disorder than the general population. So I implore you, get involved with your local dental society, study clubs, other collegial interactions and ways, because according to Pennebaker, simply talking about our problems and sharing our negative emotions with someone we trust can be profoundly healing, reducing stress, strengthening our immune system, and reducing physical and emotional distress. This is from literature, folks. This is not ideas that are steeped in dentistry. So as we go on this time together, I want to introduce you to a tool. I want to introduce you to my team framework. This is 4 out of the 10 chapters of my book, and this is at the core of my philosophy that all started with Viktor Frankl. This is on your handout. What does TEAM stand for? Thoughts lead to emotions that drive actions that manifest results. So we're going to play a little game here, and I want you, or I invite you, to think about in your mind's eye the image of the dearest friend that you have that you don't live with. Your dearest friend that you don't live with. Now, my dearest friend that I don't live with, his name is David. He actually is the clinical director at a hygiene program in Denver. So it is what? Thursday, I believe. So let's pretend that you texted your David last Thursday and you haven't heard back from your David yet. Now, listen, I asked you to think about your dearest friend. So naturally, you might have thoughts of concern. But let's put those thoughts of concern in a little box, close the lid, and put it to the side. What other thoughts might you be having about your dearest friend David's inability to text you back over the course of a week? Well, I'll tell you some of the most common answers I get when I do this live. He doesn't like me. He hates me. I said something. I'm not important anymore. And I jokingly say to my audiences, well, I saw you go out to dinner with the Joneses on Instagram. You had time to go out to dinner with Joneses. You didn't have time to text me back, right? What kind of emotions might that create? Anger, frustration, resentment? What kind of actions might that create? Well, kind of depends what kind of person you are. Maybe you'll send your David an angry text or a passive aggressive text, or maybe because you're analytical, none of us on here, right? You're going to count the exact number of days it took your David to text you back. And when he finally does, you're going to wait the exact number of days to text him back. You'll show him. But see, I tricked you. I asked you to think about your dearest friend. How does that manifest maintaining or elevating said dearest friendship? It doesn't work so well now, does it? So let's flip the equation, shall we? Let's take those thoughts of care and concerns. Let's take them out of the box. Now let's pretend, gosh forbid, that you find out that something happened to your David. Now what are your thoughts? I often hear in my live lectures, oh, I feel guilty for thinking the other stuff, right? What changed? Actually, nothing. It's the thought around it and the lack of assumption now that you know what's really going on. So now you're thinking, what can I do? How can I help? What do they need? Now what are your emotions? Care, compassion, love. Now what are your actions? Well, it depends. You DoorDash dinner, send dinner, help with the kids or the pets. You get the idea. And how does that manifest? Maintaining or elevating said dearest friendship with your David. That's a bit of a different story. So I want to challenge you right now. What's a thought that you'd be better off letting go for your team, with your patients, with your friends, with your family, with your kids? Oftentimes we don't say anything. And I'm here to tell you as a trained coach, inaction's action. And so you have that employee that keeps coming in late. You don't say anything. They come in late. You think all these negative thoughts, you get anxiety. Shoot, you start getting anxiety before you even get there. And your action is to not say anything because you don't want to rock the boat. It's one of the things people come to me most often for, actually, is how to have those difficult conversations. And then you don't say anything, or you think you say something, but how is that manifesting what it is you really need to do, which is get that employee to stop coming in late? So there's a process relative to Viktor Frankl's space that I want to talk to you a little bit about by reminding you of something we all remember. Remember this thing? Do you remember March of 2020 by any possible chance? Do you remember that weekend, that Saturday, when you went to the grocery store and it was apocalypse now and all the shelves were bare? I know you remember the text, the email, the call, the letter that dentistry is closed. Now, you see, ladies and gentlemen, I thought I left that breakfast table of horrors in my rearview mirror when I was so desperate and thought I had lost everything. And all of a sudden, I felt like I was right back there. And all of our journeys are different, but I know we all had similar catastrophic type thoughts. And mine was something like, oh my gosh, if dentistry is closed, what's going to happen to dentistry? If dentists can't treat their patients, what are the patients going to do? What's the team going to do? How are they going to remain solvent? At the time, I was with Spear and I thought, they're not going to come to learn. What's Spear going to do? Am I going to be out of a job again? And I panicked for about 2 weeks. You know what I was doing? Another acronym for you. I like acronyms. Another concept. I was jumping to catastrophe. I was taking something that, yes, was very emotionally charged and very stressful, but I was taking thoughts and making them catastrophic that affected my emotions, my actions, and my manifestations. And then it happened again. A single thought. Just like I had at the breakfast table to remind you that I'm going to be okay. I don't know where, I don't know how, I don't know with whom, but I'm going to be okay. This time it was something like, wait a minute, I've been here before. Except last time I was all alone. This time we're all in it together. So what I invite you to do is to take a picture of this slide, because I challenge you to work through my team framework to realize how you jump to catastrophe. I want you to write down that thought you're having about people in your life. I want you to write down the emotions it elicits. I want you to write down the actions or inactions you take when you have those emotions. And I want you to answer the most important question, which is, how does this manifest the results that you're looking for? If you're honest with yourself, get it out of here onto paper. The kinesthetic transfer will breathe realness into this in a much deeper and much more profound way. And I want to introduce you to a concept called dualism, which is something many of us dentists, when it comes to this subject, still believe, even though they may not realize it. Dualism was first coined by René Descartes in 1641. That the view that the mind and body exist as separate entities. To put this into time perspective, the first dental school in the world, the Baltimore College of Dental Surgery, my alma mater, opened in 1840, and the high-speed handpiece hit the market in 1957. So many of us in dentistry think that, oh, what's going on up here isn't manifested in our clinical prowess, our ability to deal with information, our ability to lead. But the reality is, there is a two-way interaction between mental and physical substances, and I'm about to prove it to you in ways that I think might blow your mind. Because you might be sitting here thinking, what does this have to do with dentistry? I'm going to say absolutely everything. And I think I coined a term, called dental dualism. Dental dualism is the idea that we think naively that all we need to do is focus on clinical and practice management topics, and we will be successful in practice. I'm going to look at you by sharing some research and tell you that's complete hogwash. Now, if you have access to dental economics, there is a detailed article that I wrote on page 10 in the January 2024 edition. And if you go on a Spears website, they've republished that article as an ebook for you to download. That there's no cost to either one of those articles if you want to learn more about what we're about to talk about. So what we're about to talk about is how the science of optimism and your thoughts affects your clinical practice of dentistry. And then we're going to talk about how to go on a different journey relative to defining what happiness is. And then we will close. That's where we're headed for the rest of the time. So let's talk about this research in terms of kind of myths, if you will, or things that we believe from a dental dualistic perspective. Positivity has nothing to do with my ability to see the bigger picture. Really? Dr. Barbara Fredrickson would beg to differ with you because she's coined a theory called the broaden and build theory. Now, you can read that for yourself on the screen, but I want you to focus on that word in the middle, momentary. You've experienced this when you're in a conversation and things are getting heated and you come out of it and you go, what did I say? What did they say? Why didn't I think of that? Why didn't that occur to me? It's Barbara Fredrickson's theory about negative momentary thought action repertoires narrowing our ability to cognitively focus. Interesting. Okay. Well, what about the fact that, it doesn't matter what I'm thinking about. It doesn't affect what I see clinically. Really? Well, if you look at the work of Schmitz, he worked with individuals trying to be positive versus negative by showing them positive versus negative imagery. And the ones primed to be positive were able to elicit the primary image in the foreground and the detail in the background. Those primed to be negative missed a lot of detail in the background. You think that's important as we conduct an examination? I think so. What about your intellectual performance? What goes on up here has nothing to do with your ability to assimilate information. Really? Well, let's look at the work of Brian, shall we? Brian worked with school children. And he split the kids in two that were about to take a standardized math test. Now, very important point, both groups had kids that were equally academically weighted. So there were high, middle, and low performers in each group. Very important point. One group simply took their standardized math test. The other group sat down to a facilitated discussion that went something like this. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. Hey, boys and girls, what was your happiest day? What did you do? Where were you? How did you feel? What was it like? Great, thanks. Go take your test. You know what the results were? The kids that went through that process blew the doors off the other kids. And remember, they were equally academically weighted. What about your body's physical responsiveness? Oh, it has nothing to do with what I think up here. Really? If you look at the work of Langer, who investigated housekeepers in 7 different hotels, split them in 2, observed how they did their job pre-study to make sure that during the study there was no variations. And half of the housekeepers simply went on their way and did what they did. The others were sat down to a facilitated discussion that went something like this. Hey, did you know that being a housekeeper is really good for you because of all the physical activity and muscle building, etc.? And then they said, great, thanks, go do your thing. You know what those results were? The individuals that participated in that discussion all lost weight. And if that's not enough for you, all of their serum cholesterol levels dropped. How crazy is that? Well, if that wasn't crazy enough, let's talk about your focus, what you think about on a daily basis. Remember the data we talked about? 50,000 thoughts per day, upwards, 80% are negative and 95% are repetitive. So you've experienced this before. It's sometimes called the new car phenomenon or the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon or frequency bias. You buy a new car and you start driving around town and you start to notice what? All the same and similar make and model vehicles that magically appeared out of nowhere. Is that what happened? No, you're simply focused on it. So I'm going to challenge you here. I sincerely hope that you're doing some type of morning huddle every day. And let's pretend you are for the sake of this discussion. I also hope that in that discussion is not just talking about exceptions, anticipated problems, anticipated challenges. I also hope it's about who are we looking forward to seeing today what was the best part of yesterday, and something as simple, yeah, as, hey, my coffee tastes great today. Little jolts, which we'll talk about in a moment, are incredibly important. So what you focus on, what you think about, is what you see. If you keep telling yourself, all I have is difficult insurance-minded patients, what are you going to see? Difficult insurance-minded patients. As we start to bring this section to a close, this is one of my two favorite studies. I'll share the second favorite study at the end of our time together. But what about your diagnostic acumen? How does positivity have anything to do with that? Well, Estrada wanted to investigate how a short burst of positivity, very important point, could affect a physician's anchoring. Anchoring is when you're anchored or stuck to an initial diagnosis, regardless of what other information comes to your knowledge. And so what he did was he gave three groups of doctors medical information to read, and they were timed. There was no time limit, they were simply timed. So there was the happy group, tell you how they were happy in a second. There was the neutral group that was given unrelated stuff to read before being given the information of the study, and then just the control group that just took the information and ran with it. You know what the results were? The happy group came to a diagnosis faster and exhibited less anchoring. Let me give you the numbers. They came to a diagnosis 20% of the way through the material, exhibiting 2.5 times less anchoring because the material was staggered to encourage anchoring, and twice as fast as the other two groups. You know how they were primed to be happy? With candy. Yeah, not the actual eating of candy that can mess with blood sugar, but no. Just here, doctor, here's some candy. You can have this when you're done. This is an incredibly important inflection point, ladies and gentlemen. Positivity and optimism is not about walking around with a smile on your face, good vibes only. We'll get to that later. That's called toxic positivity, and that's not what we're talking about here tonight. What I'm going to say to you, though, is that the research is clear. Positive brains function better and dualism doesn't exist. So I'm going to give you a tool that you've likely heard of before, but I'm going to explain to you the research behind it and to challenge you to think differently as you start your day, like we talked about with the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. Because is practicing gratitude with your team necessary and improve performance? You betcha it does. You know why teams in quotes? Because I believe that our team is our global team. It's not just the people whose paychecks you write. It's your interdisciplinary team, which, yeah, includes the folks, your laboratory technicians, your laboratory support team, because they're part of your team too. So the tool that I know you've heard of before is called gratitude. I know you've heard of this before, but I want to share with you the research because it's really important. On the left side of the screen is Dr. Martin Seligman's research. Wonderful first name, Martin, don't you think? I think so. He is a giant in positive psychology, and what he did was something fascinating. He took diagnosed depressed patients, asked them to write down 3 things a day they were grateful for 7 days and stop. And they were evaluated at 1, 3, and 6-month intervals. They reported lower levels of depression, higher levels of happiness, and higher levels of life satisfaction than the control group on meds. Now, if that's a little mushy-gushy subjective for you, I'll see you a Seligman on the left, and I'll raise you a red wine. Dr. Redwine had the same study construct, but his subject group was different. He worked with stage B heart failure patients, and the difference between the pre and post-study blood draws was that their inflammatory blood markers reduced. How crazy is that? Is inflammation important as it relates to oral health? I think so. So I hope by now you've understood that our thoughts drive emotions that create actions that manifest results. And those thoughts are incredibly important, and that we have a choice between stimulus and response as it relates to Viktor Frankl's teachings. And I want to share with you now, not just something to help you in practice, but also something to help you in life. And I was very honored to go through Dr. Ben Shahar's program. And Dr. Ben Shahar is a world-renowned thought leader in this area. He's a PhD psychologist, Harvard trained, and he first gained international notoriety when the Boston Globe picked up on the fact that there were students at Harvard standing in the hallway waiting to get into a science of happiness course. And the basis of the article was something like this: why are they wanting to learn about happiness? They're at Harvard, aren't they? Really important point. Later on, Dr. Ben Shahar founded the Happiness Studies Academy, which I am a very proud certificate holder of. It's now actually an accredited master's program. And what he did was he took a massive body of research, some of which has been over centuries, to create not only this course, but the acronym of the word SPIRE, which I am so excited to educate you about this evening. Because these weren't completely his ideas. It goes all the way back to Plato and even before. The part can never be well until the whole is well. And to me, in the words of Helen Keller, the only definition of happiness is wholeness. If you're unfamiliar with who Helen Keller is, she was blind and deaf and wrote extensively on purpose and happiness in life despite the challenges that she was given. So what I want you to understand is that this is not Martin Mendelssohn's idea. This isn't even Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar's idea. This is going from Viktor Frankl on the left to Plato to the Dalai Lama to Helen Keller to Anne Frank, and the list goes on, that whole being or happiness is the pinnacle of all goals. And we as dentists are incredibly challenged with this. And I want to share with you some reasons why. So many of us believe that happiness is when we get to some specific place or amount of money in the bank account or house or car. But the truth of the matter is that happiness is a journey, not a destination. This was determined by research. And the reality that we can't appreciate the light had we not gone through the darkness. Now, a book that I would strongly suggest you read is The Happiness Advantage by Sean Akor. He has also a TED Talk that's basically the introduction of his book that has probably over 10 million views at this point. And this one book and that TED Talk is largely responsible for kickstarting everything that's happened since that's landed us here today. And I want to put this through a dental lens because, look, I want you to understand that if we as human beings that happen to be dentists keep focusing on specific goals, we're never going to be happy, ever. And there's research on this too. So we get into dental school, we go, woohoo, I made it. Then our first day of practice, woohoo. Then our first car, then our first house, our marriage, our kids, our second house, our second car, our Porsche. But if we keep focusing on these specific guardrails or points, we're never going to be happy. Why? Because when we get there, the goalposts keep changing. So I want to ask you a question. And I mean this in all seriousness. And before I even tell you the question, I'm going to tell you my answer. My answer is yes. So how many of you believe if you won $500 million in the lottery tonight, you would be happy? I would. For a very short period of time. We all would. And what happens is once that wears off, we go back to our baseline level of happiness. They've done studies with this with lottery winners. It's called hedonic adaptation. How many of you have lamented the passing of a celebrity where you say, why would they do that? They had it all. Did they? They didn't think so. And so what I can tell you in all candor, and I say this and I obviously modify it for every wonderful, beautiful audience that I speak to. Am I happy that I've been honored by NDX and Jessica to be asked to be here tonight? Oh, you betcha I'm happy. But what am I happy about? I'm not happy about this. I'm happy about the choices I've made, the things that I've learned, the nights and weekends I spent learning, the effort I took to create this presentation and to modify it. That's what makes me happy. And it's not fluff, and it takes time, which we'll talk about, but you can get to this place too, because skills of the brain and skills of the lips are the same as skills of the hand. They're just with a different body part. How long did it take you to prep your first crown? How long does it take you now? Why is it shorter? Because of time, effort, and practice. I invite you, remember I said I was going to challenge you? I invite you to consider that this stuff is the same thing as I just said with a different body part. So happiness is multidimensional. It's not just one thing. And great dentistry is multidimensional. You know that. But what I see from my several decades in dental education, continuing education, I should probably change this to a CT scan, right? Is that so many dentists take the time to educate themselves for themselves, but how much effort are we putting into the team? Because the truth of the matter is, whole being is a metaphor, a framework, a path, not only for personal happiness, but for the provision of great dentistry. Because we'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about relationships. But we have to understand that we all are unique human beings that see things from different places because of who we are and our life experiences. And so you may think the sky is blue, but your team may think it's green. And actually, that's okay. The trick then becomes, how do we have a common understanding that if we're saying blue and they're saying green, that we have an agreement that we can move forward in a different way? So when we think about happiness as being multidimensional, this came to me, believe it or not, in the shower about 8 months ago. Happiness, I'd like you to think of like a rainbow, because most people view rainbows as beautiful, I think. That they're also elusive, because if you've ever tried to chase one in your car, by the time you get close, it's not there. The mythology states that there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It happens after a storm, and it's comprised of a multitude of colors or parts. So what I'd invite you to do, I can't see you, you're probably by yourself. I invite you to close your eyes for the next 10 to 20 seconds. And I'm going to ask you to think about something. So if you're comfortable, close your eyes. I want you to think about the happiest day in your life. Who were you with? What was the occasion? What did you do? Were you active all day or hanging out on a beach? Was there a celebratory meal involved, or maybe some cocktails or wine? How did you feel about the people you were with? What did you learn about the people you were with? And how did you feel emotionally? What was your best day? So I invite you to open your eyes as we go into our last segment here before our closing around the acronym of the word SPIRE. And I want to share with you what this means and how you can bring it into your life to create more positive days than challenging days. So the S stands for spiritual well-being. I'll also say whole being at parts as interchangeable phrases, so please forgive me. Spiritual well-being is not necessarily about organized religion, although it could be. Spiritual whole being or well-being is about meaning, purpose, and presence. Now, I'm going to bend your brain a little bit here for a minute, because here's the truth. All we got's the present. The past has already happened. The future hasn't happened yet. And when we actually get to that future place, guess what that then becomes? Your present. So what I'm going to say to you, having gone through hell and back myself in my own life, is that looking at the future, particularly now, with positivity is just as valid as looking at it with negativity, because neither has happened yet. And if you say to me, well, Martin, I have to look at the future with trepidation because you don't know what's going to happen, I'm not talking about planning for future financial challenges. I'm talking about your mindset, the thoughts that go through your brain, those repetitive ones. And if you say to me, well, I need to be cautious, were you listening to me 10 minutes ago? You can do that, but you also need to understand that you bear a cost for those negative thoughts in your visualization, cognition, ability to see the bigger picture, and even your ability to diagnose. So when it comes to spiritual well-being, I want you to think about, what can we do to go above and beyond for ourselves and our patients to honor spiritual well-being and be present in that moment when that patient is vulnerable, reclined with their mouth open. Physical well-being is as it sounds, and we learned all about 3 categories: nutrition, rest, and exercise. And I think everybody knows, either in generalities or specifics, that eating well, resting, and exercising is a good idea. But I took this quote from Dr. Ben Shahar that really struck me in the middle of the course. If we agree that exercise has been well established as an antidepressant, then I think it's safe to say that a lack of exercise can function as a depressant. I shared with you the statistics earlier. We're 2.5 times more likely to suffer from anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and depression than the general population. What we do is very physical. How can we honor our bodies with exercise? It doesn't take a lot. I'm not going to go into that, but it doesn't take a lot per week to keep your body in physical and mental shape that's more positive than perhaps you're in now. So another thought for you is, what can you do to bring physical well-being into your practice of dentistry and into your life? The I stands for intellectual whole being or well-being. This is a big one. This is about living a life of curiosity. And how can you challenge yourself to live a curious life versus a judgmental one? You know what example I love to use for this? It's when you're driving to the practice and someone cuts you off. What do you instinctively say, most of us? That jerk. And what are you assuming? You're assuming they saw you and they did it on purpose. If we think about it in just, cut and dry terms, fair. Well, what if they didn't even see you? I mean, do you really think they wanted to try to have an accident on their way to work themselves? Really? And so there's a cost when we look at the world through judgmental eyes. You have that patient who comes in and they're kind of nasty and you've never seen them before. You all know that patients are afraid of the dentist. That's not secret. What's causing that? What's the thing behind the thing? How can we be curious to ask those open-ended questions, to open up the aperture to find out, is it fear? Is it prior experience? Are they in pain? Are they worried about not being able to afford it and the shame that comes with it? So how can we start to be continually curious to learn and support the practice as a whole in our daily lives? Next is relational well-being, interpersonal relationships. Look, you spend more time with your team than you do your own family. You know that. The Grant study, often called the Harvard study, was the longest longitudinal study, ever conducted in human history that followed originally 263 undergraduate men, it was later expanded, for over 75 years, measuring anthropologic, sociologic, physiologic data points, IQ, net worth, position in society, number of kids or not, married or not. You get the idea, everything. And the number one overriding conclusion by a landslide was that the warmth of relationships throughout life have the greatest positive impact on life satisfaction. One of the biggest things that changed my life was when I very much internalized the idea that doctors are patients, patients are doctors. That doctors are people, people are doctors. That team are people, people are team. And patients are people, and people are patients. So when I work with practices, I'm not going to talk to you about production. I'm going to talk to you about how to work together as a team, how to dig yourself out of those times when your thoughts are driving emotions that are creating actions that are manifesting the silent treatment. And so this is an alliance from one of my friends and clients where we work through, what kind of place do we want to show up every day? These are their words: supportive, cross-reliant, open. When things get challenging, how do we want to deal with each other? Without emotion, transparent, brave, understanding. And when the poop hits the fan, how are we going to keep each other accountable? With daily presence, creating unity, setting and respecting the time, creating commitment, trust. And so when we can set this as a cornerstone, we can deal with anything. And it sets the precedent and the tone to have a relationship with individuals that you spend more time with than your own family. And oftentimes people put a smile on their face, they wear a mask. We don't know how people are really feeling until we ask. Think about the Grant study. Relationships are critically important. You don't have to have a big posse, but you got to have people you can count on. So what actions can you take to improve your relationships in the practice and out of the practice? And last but not least, as we begin to close, there is emotional well-being. This is where we get to talk about the T word, or toxic positivity. Because emotional well-being is not about ignoring negativity. It is about embracing negativity. It is about having it flow through and flow past you. Toxic positivity is the belief that we should put a positive spin on all experiences, even those that are profoundly tragic. Absolutely flippin' not. And walking around going, la, 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 happy thoughts, good vibes only, that's toxic and that's not helpful. A tool for you to use is this. And it's something I'm sure you've heard of before. And in its most common usage, it's toxic too. But I have an expanded version. Did you ever hear the phrase, everything happens for a reason? Yeah, that could be toxic because you're trying to put a positive spin. Oh, it must have happened for a reason. Well, sometimes the reason stinks. And so step one, everything happens for a reason. I'm accepting that this is what it is. Number two, this stinks. I'm mad. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I'm going to go for a walk, eat my pint of Ben & Jerry's, whatever it is. And step three, okay, what am I going to learn from this? What did the universe teach me? What can I do next time if it's clinically based so that I can reduce variables to reduce the opportunity of this being a challenge in the future? So that's SPIRE. And I want you to think about SPIRE in the frame of your best day. I guarantee you had almost every, if not all, of the elements of SPIRE. You felt like there was purpose to that best day. You had some physical filling of your body, treating like your body like a vessel, whether it was a wonderful meal or relaxing on the beach or going on your first marathon. You were intellectually curious about the world around you, and you felt emotionally charged and positive about the relationships of people you were with, and they filled your cup up emotionally. How am I doing? Is that fair? So when we breathe life and aspire, I invite you to take a picture of this as well. How can we go above and beyond for ourselves and our patients to be present every day? What can we do to bring physical well-being to our practice and our lives? How will we be curious and be open to alternatives? How will we improve our relationships? And last but not least, how can we embrace versus ignore emotions to have them pass through you? If you follow me on LinkedIn, you might have noticed in August, I posted this whole thing about blowing a tire on the side of the road in Phoenix in 110-degree heat. Go look that up, and it'll explain exactly what I mean. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to sum up what we learned today, share with you that last bit of research that I love so much, and tell you a little story. So what did we learn today? Well, number one, we learned that many of us are miserable, statistically. We learned that positivity will affect your practice and clinical success, that there is no I in team, but there is me, that our thoughts lead to emotions that drive actions that manifest results, that we all jump to catastrophe, dualism is hogwash, happiness is a journey, not a destination, and that happiness has 5 parts, as represented by SPIRE. So before I share with the research, I promised to give you some gifts. So one of the gifts I want to give you is my podcast with my dear friend, Dr. Kyle Stanley. This is an open podcast. You don't have to even subscribe. We have 44 episodes in the can. We post every week all about personal practice and physical wellness. And so if you're looking for the podcast or how to get in touch with me, you have this QR code on your handout. So in our last couple minutes, I want to tell you about my favorite piece of research. So if I asked you what you did for a living, you would likely answer me with a label: dentist, hygienist, lab technician, something like that. In all honesty and candor, I worked very hard on this, but you know how I answer the question, what do I do? This is what I say. And by the way, I now have a Major League Baseball player friend because of this response. I help people get out of their own way on stages with their teams and one-on-one. And Dr. Wisniewski was looking to investigate how people viewed what it is they did for a living. How much purpose was there? And so what she did was she created a questionnaire to bucket how people viewed what they did for a living into 3 categories. Job was number 1. Hey, I'm just here for the paycheck. 2 was career. I'm here for I'm here for positional or financial advancement. And calling was I'm here for the greater good of humankind. So what she did was she went into a hospital and she asked questions of, you ready for this? Neurosurgeons and janitors. Questions to determine how they viewed what it is they did for a living. Interesting side note, this has been repeated by other investigators with other subject groups, got the same results. So although there was a greater number relatively of neurosurgeons that viewed what they did was a calling, there was a relatively even split, a third, a third, a third, between neurosurgeons and janitors, how they viewed what they did for a living. So let's get blunt, shall we? You had janitors mopping up blood, bodily fluids, and vomit that viewed what they did for a living as a calling. And you had neurosurgeons excising tumors, removing cancers, changing lives, that for some, they were in it mostly for the financial compensation. So I'd like to tell you a little story about something that happened to me in 2018 that brought light to this subject and specifically this research. We decided to go on an Alaskan cruise. Because, by the way, I had been to all 50 states except for Alaska and Maine. And so I wanted to hit those before I was 50. So that's why we went. Now, if you've ever been on a cruise, you know, you kind of go through like an airport style security deal where they check your bag, quote unquote, and then bring it up to you later. You go through, give them your credit card, go through the metal detector. And so we got on board about 11:30, dropped our carry-on in our stateroom. We were a little hungry. We were on deck 10. The only place open was the buffet on deck 12. So up we went because the elevators were crazy. And what I'm about to share with you happened very quickly. But as we rounded the last flight of stairs, we heard a lot of ruckus, loud talking, laughter, boisterousness. And we rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed was, boy, there's a lot fewer people than I thought there'd be for the volume. And I noticed that in the middle of this melee was this woman in a cruise uniform holding a spray bottle with clear liquid in it, spraying hand sanitizer, paging Captain Obvious, into people's hands. But that wasn't how she was doing it. This is how she was doing it. Hi, how are you? Washy, washy, lunchy, lunchy. My name is Miley, rhymes with smiley. I honestly thought, what is this woman on? Hi, lunchy, lunchy, washy, washy. Oh, you're so cute to the boy or to the girl. Oh, you're so handsome to the little boy. And so, feeling like I had to go through the gauntlet to get to the crab legs, I sheepishly approached, extended my hand. She looks me right in the eye and says, "Hello, sir. Thank you for being here. Washy, washy, squirt." And I'm embarrassed to admit that I rubbed my hands together, looked at my spouse, and said, "Well, that was weird." Well, this woman was there the first day, second day, the entire cruise. So I want to ask you a question out of curiosity, not out of judgment. Would you want to stand on your feet for 8 hours a day, spraying hand sanitizer in people's hands? Around day 3, we started to notice little boys and little girls running up the stairs. What do you think they were singing? Washy, washy, lunchy, lunchy. On day 3 and forward, I started to notice with my own eyes 2 women and 1 man, so there had to be more, that walked up to her with tears in their eyes, thanking her for the perspective she offered simply by doing her job in the way in which she did it. To bring this story to a close, on day 5, I was reading The How of Happiness by none other than Lubomirsky, and I came upon Dr. Wisniewski's research for the 4th time about job, career, calling, and I realized, oh, I have a poster child that I can talk to about this. And I literally, as it so happened, was on the outer deck 20 feet away from the entry to the buffet. So I went inside and I approached. And I looked at this beautiful woman whose name isn't Miley, that you can see from her name tag, it's Elena. And I said, may I ask you a question? She said, yes. I said, my name is Martin. This is what I do. This is what I talk about. I talked about job career calling. I said, so here's my question. If I met you on land, like at a restaurant or something, what would you tell me you did for a living? And she looks at me and she winks and she goes, I work in a restaurant. I said, all right, whatever. I said, really? If I met you on land, what would you tell me you did? She looks at me, she picks up the name tag that you can see in the picture. She waves it at me and she raises her voice and she says, I'm a waitress, releasing with a flourish, and then says, but I make people happy. I make people smile. She continues. When I say thank you for being here, it's not thank you for coming to the buffet. It's thank you for being on the cruise because I love my job. And she leans closer. She bears into my soul and she says, sir, my colleagues, my coworkers, they say Elena, not Miley. What do you do? What do you take? How do you work out? Why are you so happy? She leans in even further, this close to me, and says, sir, I don't do anything. It's all up here. So that's what I want to leave you with. It is all up here. The power to change is within you. The research is clear. And we need to learn from other professions and industries to the benefit of our own mental health, the health of our teams, and the health of our patients. I know in my soul that you have in you to become any kind of tree you want. And maybe today you are that acorn, but you always have the choice to become the beautiful tree. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention.